Hi Aryan Times, I learned the last time. It's pronounced perfectly right.
It's almost perfect, yeah.
Almost.
Yeah, it's, almost. It's times. Times, yeah. But a lot of people don't hear the difference between times from like the newspaper, the New York Times, or my last name, Times. It's a very subtle difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your name sounds stronger. It's like Aryan Times.
Yeah. That's like I said, it's almost perfect.
Oh, okay. I thought now I'm really perfect, but I have to practice until the next time. However, you pinged me and said I was wrong. And in 1904th edition of Airhacks TV, this was the last one. And because what I did, I mentioned that, Payara is like bug free or free, bug free, Glassfish. Because it's backed by the Payara guys and comes with less bugs and is more active. And you said it's no more true. And take a look at GitHub contributions. And I did it. I've opened. And indeed, Glassfish is very active. It's hard to tell whether it is more active than Payara. Because in Payara, seems like the commits distribute amongst more people. So the chart is not as, not as high. Or not as emphasized as in the case of Glassfish, where there are lesser committers with more contributions. So, but I would say at least as high. So, why that? I mean, why Glassfish is now alive? Is it your fault or?
Yeah. So I've been working before to get Glassfish to get certified for each new Jakarta EE version. But that was the initial thing for Glassfish to continue. But then at some point, I looked at it and I thought, well, it's actually quite a shame if we only use this for compatibility reasons. And then approximately like a year ago, I thought, okay, why not? Let's see if we can update this a little, see if we can fix some bugs, see if we can do some things there. And yeah, so piece by piece, it got into the habit of fixing more bugs in Glassfish, making it a more productive ready server. And then quite quickly, actually, things became rolling. So we got contributions from some other people. So indeed, it's not as much as several other projects. But still, we have like 3-4 steady committers, 2 super steady ones who contribute a lot. And the project really started to become alive again. So that's more or less the background there. So there wasn't like a real plan. There was just, okay, let's just see if we can get this running a little again. And then from one commit came the other. Then we started to do more and more. And it's also nice that we focused a lot on getting the technical depth down. This is something you might not be able to do when you're in a company. Depends on the company, of course, but you have other concerns too. But if you're just doing this out of your own free hours, it's easier to focus on just the technical depth that you want to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, this is also more fun, right? To fix the technical depth, because you can delete lots of code. And if you're having a commercial product, it's a way harder because you have to support your clients and you have to keep everything stable to the outside, I would say. So there is more risk. Actually, if you have commercial product, it is not very wise just to fix the technical depth, because you are introducing additional risk without any additional features, right?
Yeah, yes and no. So like the yes is, of course, refactoring introduces risk. There's no features. Customers don't always see the refactoring. So that's a risk, true. On the other hand, when you continue with a code base full of technical depth, then increasingly adding features becomes more difficult.
Yeah, of course.
Really sure which change touches which thing. Everything is so intertwined. You got these ancient bits of code that don't do anything, but you're still afraid of them, so you don't touch them. And all those things build up over the years. So we were in a kind of good position here that there's not that much commercial pressure. for Glassfish, but we were able to tackle all these fundamental issues there. So there was a lot of depth regarding to the older JDK versions. So Glassfish, of course, everybody knows this, I think, was once a product of Sun Microsystems. And Sun Microsystems owned the JDK as well. So what they did in a lot of classes was just copying large parts of the JDK, but not everything. So they kept a lot of dependencies to the JDK, which were, of course, Sun dependencies. But at the time, it probably made sense since you were like Sun depending on Sun. So that wasn't that bad, probably. But now, of course, it's quite different. So you have all those things that deeply touched Sun code that you couldn't update anymore. That's what we did. We replaced a lot of those things. Some things just had to be ripped out since they were pretty much impossible to port. Other things we ported, so we introduced new code for that. Some things were quite easy to fix, a few code changes here and there. Other things needed to be completely rewritten. So especially things concerning the security APIs had to be removed. The EGB and connectors proxy generation that need to be massively changed. So we were quite in a position to be able to do all those things. But that was quite interesting to do.
This sounds like fun, B. I mean, this is like, refactoring just for fun. Speaking of fun, do you have too much free time, or what's wrong with you? So usually you're running a company, you are skilled, Java EE security expert. So it's like, you just gave up and say, okay, now I'm retired. I'm just fixing, old projects. I think the next one is going to be End, right?
Yes. Yeah. Now, of course, realistically, one thing has to give. You can't spread yourself too thin. If you look at my commit graph, you see like there's bouts of commits to my other project, Piranha Cloud. That stops for a few weeks, and then I move on to say Mahara. So I fix bugs, I do things for Mahara. Then again, that stops, and I switch over to Glassfish. So I do try to moderate it a little, not do too much at the same time. But it's like a serial multiple project commit thing.
Yeah, but still, I would say if you take just Piranha to the maximum, I would say you could be you will be busy all the time just to dealing with Piranha Cloud. So why you are fixing Glassfish?
Yeah, so they do overlap in a sense. So they are two completely different projects, but they do share the components. So a lot of components that are used in Piranha Cloud are also used by Glassfish, or the other way around. But one of the things we've been looking at the refactoring effort is splitting out a number of components. So we started with the authorization code that was extracted to a new project called Exusia. And we used that project in Piranha as well. So then the authorization bits are shared between Glassfish and Piranha. There's plans to do the same for transactions. So currently transactions is embedded within the Glassfish code. It's not a separate project like Mahara or Jersey. But the plan is to make that a separate project too, and then share it between Piranha and Glassfish. So then, in a way, Piranha is kind of the highly modular small version of Glassfish in a way. So they do strongly connect, even though they are different projects. But that's kind of the incentive of starting with Glassfish as well, instead of just fixing, like you say, End, for instance.
Yeah. So you are not completely crazy. It makes also business sense, or at least project sense for you, which is perfect because what happened right now, Glassfish becomes a better product, and even the Payara guys can participate or not participate. They can benefit from the Glassfish improvements. I took a look at the. There are also some Payara guys still contributing, like Steven Milic contributed towards end of or beginning end of 2021, and if you are improving the technical foundation, they could pick this foundation, have less effort in Payara, and contribute back something else. So Glassfish becomes better and better product, and the foundation for everyone, right?
Yes, yeah. So already that is happening. So Payara is at the moment moving to true JDK 17 compatibility, meaning they actually compile and build on JDK 17. And in doing that, they took a lot of commits from Glassfish. So actually, they took the commit as patches, since the source code has diverted. They can't directly up merge or down merge. But they did do it in patches. So my name is again in the commit list of Payara. But that's nice to see. And of course, that's the intention of open source. I mean, like, the source is open. It's there to share. And if the source would not be picked up by anyone, then what's the point of open source? Yeah. So it's actually very great that the Payara guys have been able to take those changes in Glassfish, use them to improve Payara as well. And that makes the entire ecosystem a better place for everybody. And in that way, we still, the two teams, they still participate in the overall Jakarta EE ecosystem together in a way. So that's really good.
Yeah, and this is what I also see just from Twitter, is that still everyone like each other, right? So you are on Piranha, Payara, and Glassfish, and everyone works together. Everyone has the own agenda, but everyone meets in Jakarta EE, Java EE, and Glassfish. Actually, this is the common meeting point, right?
Yeah, indeed. And I worked, of course, with the Payara guys a long time, and I still have a couple of friends over there, which is still good to see them making progress as well. So that's the overall ecosystem thing. That's good.
And I like to see your committer name in the patches of Payara. So it's also a nice touch.
Yeah, that's also quite nice to see indeed. One more thing, by the way, about the Glassfish refactoring effort is that we've also been focusing quite a bit on testing. So there's a lot of embedded tests within the Glassfish project, but they were all kind of in a non-working state. So there's an immense testing folder. It's in App Server Test, where you discover one test after the other, and wow, did they add tests for this as well? But they haven't been run for a long time, and they were quite outdated. They were quite flaky. They didn't always pass. So for the last 6, 7, 8 months, we have this huge issue, which is, I think, just modernize all tests and take them forward 20 years or so in time, where we essentially go to all the tests, update them, give them new dependencies. So we moved them all to Unit 5. We updated them all to use JDK 11, JDK 17. And this is also a great contribution to this refactoring effort, where we are more confident that all those changes that we do in refactoring, that they still leave the project in a stable version. So that's a bit coming back to the beginning. We said, okay, well, refactoring is a risk, since you change things, it introduces risk and things might break. So we counterbalance that with all the tests that we improve and add.
This is fully understandable. So what I did last year, I think I created a small utility open source project with my setup. And why I did it is because it was, for me, easier to maintain. So I know, my GitHub is like the generic part. I keep it current. So it's also nice. It's just picked by others. But if I have a commercial project, it's my starting point. I just clone it and, refine it a little bit or refine it. There's nothing to refine, make it more customer specific. This is what I meant by refinement. Yeah. And for me, it's way easier to maintain that way because I say, okay, on GitHub is not a master. Without GitHub, I had it somewhere on my hard disk and had to remember where it is. It was a way harder to find. And GitHub is the additional backup, actually. And for my clients, it's also nice because, there are some screencasts and videos, so they can look at this and say, okay, this is a kind of a standard. It won't disappear in one day. So, and this is, of course, my projects are tiny, so I'm consultant. But in your case, it makes absolute sense. So what I wanted to ask about, what is the progress with Piranha? Because we had a chat a little while ago, and you told me back then is like, the servlet already starts. And I said, okay, nice. This is what we had in 1995, right? But I assume you are now more capable than back then, right?
Yeah, that's true. So it's still an after-hours project, Piranha. Mm-hmm. So they're not moving with the same speed as maybe a commercial project would be that had like 20 developers on it. So it's like every month we do a few commits, we improve things, we improve the compatibility. But yeah, things have taken off quite a bit from there. So just the other day, we achieved Microprofile 5 compatibility for JWT. So it's not the entire Microprofile 5 suite. It's just JWT. Mm-hmm. And by extension, that's Microprofile config. It depends on that. So it makes use of it. We don't know yet if it passes the TCK for that. Probably will, but we haven't tested that. But that's a quite good achievement because it means that like a lot of things are working. Like Jakarta REST is beneath that. CDI is beneath that. Servlet as well. So the entire package is working quite well there. Mm-hmm. With regards to the compatibility, I think back then when we had the last chat, it was like, I don't know, 70% or so, something that we had for compatibility. And now we're like at 98 something percent. So we almost pass the servlet TCK. Mm-hmm. So that's quite something for us. So indeed, you say, well, it's people passed the TCK in 2000 or so. But it's still quite difficult to implement the entire thing from scratch.
Yeah, I'm not that interested, in the complete TCK support. I'm more because they are just corner cases. I assume the HTTP2 alone is a huge amount of work to support.
Yes, yeah. So that's but one of the things. It's just two tests.
Yeah.
So it's not that much in terms of compatibility percentages. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a huge amount of work that we still have to do.
Yeah, and for me it would be, I'm actually don't need servlet at all. Jakarta support and CDI, a subset of CDI would be enough to have productive projects, So I was this was my comment, like, okay, servlet is not that valuable, but if you have 80% servlets, 80% Jakarta, 80% CDI, and whatever, maybe a little bit bin validation, then we are talking. Then I can actually port all my applications to run on Piranha, and Piranha becomes a viable platform for me. And I will know over time it becomes better and better. So I don't have to have the 100% compatibility. It is nice to have, but I try to avoid some sophisticated features. For instance, only in a few projects I'm using interceptors in CDI, right? So in a business project there is not lots of room to do such a thing, or producers in CDI, not that common in business projects. You don't need them. You can just inject your POJOs and they're away to go. So
yeah, sure.
So this is why this was my comment regarding servlets. So what I understood right now, so you are almost done with Microprofile 5?
Yeah, with the JWT portion of it. So it's not the entire Microprofile, but we are going to move into supporting the other required elements. So that's Open API, health, those kinds of things. So that will be next on the agenda. Mm-hmm.
But what are you supporting right now? Which specs are you supporting right now from Microprofile or Jakarta EE?
Yeah, so we're essentially the base profile within the server. So we have multiple distributions of the server, of the runtime. It's actually not always a server. It's like a runtime that scales up from a very small thing, it's just a Lambda function kind of thing, to something that's more like a micro version, something that's more like a dynamic version of micro, to a server version, to an application server version. So every time the distribution adds things that a typical application server does. So the smallest version does not have a HTTP server. It does not have a deployment mechanism. It does, of course, not have an undeployment mechanism. Then the next version has a deployment concept, but no HTTP server, etc., etc. So the middle ground version that we think is most suited to a normal development. It's kind of like the micro version. That supports basically all the things to also support microprofile JWT in this case. So that would be, of course, servlet. It's JSP that almost comes with it. It's CDI. It's interceptors still, since the annotations do use interceptors behind the scenes. It's Jakarta security with Jakarta authentication and Jakarta authorization, REST, and then JWT. So that's kind of like the basic stack that to us is a bit like a core stack kind of thing. So a couple of the technologies behind it, so indeed servlet and the security specs, you don't quite see them so much. Like the entry level for you would be JAX-RS, Jakarta REST, and then the other things are just beneath the surface, so to speak. And then within Jakarta REST, you can use your JWT security or other authentication mechanisms if you wish. So that's kind of the basic stack. So having Jakarta REST with CDI and all the security things beneath it.
Yeah, this is actually great news. So it means we have another kid on the block, right?
Yeah, more or less. So we have.
Why more or less? Because for my project, it would be, for a lot of projects, it would be sufficient. There are some projects using, JPA. The others are using NoSQL databases. So then it doesn't matter in this case. But if I get JAX-RS with CDI, and then I'm already in good shape. And JWT, of course, and security is huge. So it looks actually really nice.
Yeah, so it's indeed, that was the more part. The less part is that we're still maybe not that confident yet, but that's maybe just being typically the Dutch. You don't brag too much about the stuff you do. You can always, but we're improving by the day, really. So it's the project is starting to get really viable to do like actual application development on it. Since, like I said, we support all those things. We do really like to get to the 100% of servlets, just to have something tangible as a certification thing. But indeed, it's true. Like a lot of projects out there, even the most popular ones, Tomcat, Jetty, Tom EE, they weren't officially certified for a long time. Yeah. And still the most popular thing out there.
Yeah.
But he knew they were essentially compatible with Jakarta EE or Java EE back then as servlet. But they hadn't had this certification thing, and they were still the most popular projects out there. So yeah, in that sense, Piranha Cloud is really getting to start becoming ready for actual application development.
And I think I use Quarkus all the time, and it's hugely popular in my projects, but I think Quarkus is still not completely microprofile compatible. There are some corner cases where Quarkus isn't. I don't care, but I heard on Twitter that you are not compatible. So, okay, but it doesn't matter in my project, so I don't care. And I think Helidon, is microprofile compatible, but I think Helidon doesn't support servlets at all.
No, so those are kind of projects that are in the same corner of the market that we are. So it's a bit of my microprofile, it's a bit of Jakarta EE, and together trying to become this runtime for a lot of things, but don't necessarily or completely not be an application server. So there's no installed thing. There's no concept of deploying and undeploying things. Yep. And Headless is the same concept as we have with Piranha. We even compared Headless and Piranha in an article on Java. So there's an article in Java Magazine that compares the two a bit to each other. And they're quite in the same league. So Piranha is attempting to focus more on also supporting most Jakarta EE components. Headless is first and for all focusing on microprofile, but they're taking up more and more Jakarta EE components as well. So they support persistence, I think, XWS, I think even, beam validation. So they have a number of things they support in addition to microprofile. I think transactions as well. So that's quite interesting. They're not a Jakarta EE runtime, but they do have way more Jakarta EE specifications than microprofile would require. So that's interesting. And like I said, they're both this runtime where you start your application with the runtime as a library kind of thing and not as an application server.
Actually, it took me a long time to understand the difference, or not to notice the difference between application servers and runtimes. And I had a chat at the podcast with Bruno Borges, and we had a chat. And then I said, okay, of course, because I referred always to application servers. And actually, the deployment, I didn't care about the deployment either, because what I always did in Docker is I bundled everything together, and auto deploy happened behind the scenes without noticing. So the deployment was, I think, for the last 10 years, I never deployed something to application server. I always shipped, the entire thing. And then I started to think about, okay, and then it's really the case that, the deployment on application servers don't matter, and I rename it to runtime. So this was the only difference. And, but I use exactly the same what I did, since 2005. I would say I was against the shared deployment very early. As the hardware became cheaper, I never saw the point again why we should share, multiple components in a single application servers. I usually use the application servers to increase productivity because I could focus just on the business logic and they did everything else for me. But even now, I would even consider application servers as serverless, really, because what we did, we just created a war, and we in some companies you were even not allowed, to deploy the war by your own. So you had, to pass it to for deployment, and they deploy that for you. So it was truly serverless experience. And yeah. So interesting. So but Piranha is runtime, and application server. It depends on the edition, right? It could be a library, it could be a runtime, or it can be an application server.
Yes, so it scales up in those various distributions. And in the smallest version, it's just a library. So it's something that's called by a serverless installation. It's just a Lambda. It's essentially a kind of Lambda function, but then with the servlet API there. It's not the full servlet API, but it's just enough to get an HTTP request into your application, and then you can do with HTTP request whatever you want. But there's not much else going on. So it's just a familiar servlet environment, familiar servlet APIs, but you're really a Lambda function. You are being called by the cloud provider, which most other cases they use a specific API for that, and here you have the familiar servlet API. Other than that, it's just a Lambda function.
Wait a second. It means that you are supporting the Lambda HTTP events?
No, not that. It's that when you're like in a serverless environment, typically you implement some kind of interface from the cloud provider where you get an HTTP request. And then you just work with HTTP request. But the interface you get And the HTTP type, the class encapsulating that one, those are all specific to the provider.
Exactly.
So you can, for instance, I'm just making something up, a handle HTTP interface, and then you get like an HTTP exchange class, and then you work.
What you get on AWS, you get a JSON event with path and request param. So the entire information what we had in the header is already parsed and is available in HTTP event for you. There are two such events. So what you only would have to do is to I don't think even you have to parse the file, because there is an HTTP event in Java already ready to use. It's like JSON deserialized, but you could even get the event as a string. And then what you will have to do is, to say, okay, this is get with this parameters and this headers, and just invoke a JAX-RS endpoint or whatever you have, or your servlet. So this will be the mapping. So it will be trivial. Have you thought about such a thing?
Yeah, so a little. So like one of the contributors is Manfred Riem, and he works for Microsoft, working with the Azure team.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So he's naturally quite interested in that area. Mm-hmm. So there are things on the roadmap specifically relating to those kinds of things. It wouldn't be AWS in the first instance, but Microsoft Azure to start with.
But Microsoft Azure is very similar. There's also Azure Functions, and you get also this is almost identical. You can have HTTP events, or you can have just React, to just a method, and you get past everything. So you have usually the synchronous functions are backed by a kind of gateway or proxy, which receives the HTTP events, converts them to HTTP, and passes them to the lambdas. And on Azure, there is a service behind that. On AWS, it can be HTTP API gateway, REST API gateway, or application load balancer. But you get, in any case, you get a JSON object.
Yeah, and those environments are what the smallest version of Payara Nano.
Maybe an information for you. Maybe it will be interesting, because if you search for AWS serverless containers, Jersey, you will find a project from AWS, and they did it with Jersey. So they implemented the adapter layer for you, which now picks the JSON object and invokes Jersey functions. So it could be already usable for you without any changes, because I assuming you are also related to Jersey, because if this is Glassfish project. So I think you could reuse the entire code. I already looked at the code because I was curious. I wanted actually to experiment with it just for fun, but I had no time.
Yeah, it might be interesting for Piranha to look at. Indeed.
If you search for AWS serverless containers, it has to be the link, and then Jersey, there will be a GitHub project. And I took a look, and they already integrated Jersey to be invoked by HTTP event. This is an official AWS project.
Okay, yeah. So that sounds a bit similar indeed to that thing. So in our case, it would be like a more universal thing, since like we would integrate with the service provider, and then you get a default HTTP servlet environment. With some restrictions, and then from there you can call or integrate whatever other thing depends on servlet. So it's more like a small plug-in type of thing, where you go from your provider to a familiar HTTP servlet interface type of thing. So that's quite interesting. It's something we could definitely take a look at.
So this was the first runtime. You say the first, version of Piranha is like, the Lambda-like integration, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So the next version is essentially quite like that, but it implements a full servlet environment.
Okay.
So it's the Lambda version is just really small. It doesn't have things like an HTTP session, for instance. Doesn't get too many listeners. So the next version after that is more like a full servlet environment. So we can do a lot of more things with that. And it's at the same time, so both Nano and the embedded version, they're quite suitable for embedding in other applications. So it's essentially when you run in a cloud provider environment, you're embedding your gateway thing or your plugin type within their environment. So that's where the embedding thing comes from. And that's the main difference between Piranha Nano and embedded. So one is just a very small environment where you just get the HTTP servlet request and a familiar servlet interface, but there's not much else. And embedded is actually trying to implement a full servlet environment, so including, when we do support it, HTTP2, sessions, and all the stuff that comes with that. So that's the next version after Piranha Nano.
And what are your plans with it? It's just fun, or you would like to start a company around that, or?
Yeah, so especially with the version that comes after that, the Piranha Nano, and then the Piranha Micro, with all the other stuff that comes with that, making it more suitable for a lot of use cases. Yeah, we do intend to build something around that. So it's still early days. But a support company for those technologies, that's definitely on the table. So we're currently investigating a little bit what's there. So looking a bit at the market, where can we exactly function, where can we exactly provide value to the market. So yeah, that's on the table for sure.
So now we learned what you did do in your free time. So in your free time, you became, one of the most active Glassfish committers and Piranha committers. Yeah. So what do you do now at work?
Yeah, so at work, it's just essentially at the moment random consulting.
Okay.
So it's just various jobs. So it's typically for a few days in the week. 4 days in a week, so I have like 1 day for the other projects, or it's after hours of the other project. It depends a little bit on the customer. But it's just stuff like, for instance, the last customer was about, we've got a very specific Maven plugin that they wanted for their build. So they saw me online, I did an article about the Maven plugin, so they contacted me.
Okay.
And I wanted to be like very specific, stripping resources, adding things to it, but it was by itself quite interesting. So I did that. Customer before that was a bank in Canada, where they had a JSF application running on Spring Boot, doing lots of stuff. And so yeah, it's typically that kind of work. So it's mostly not specifically glamorous. It's just things to get done. But of course, that's what Jakarta EE is about as well. It's just a tool to get the job done, and it does that quite well. And it does it like really well for the customers.
You're participating in Jakarta EE process still a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm still on the Jakarta EE steering committee. So I'm involved with that, and I'm quite often, but not always, on the platform call too. So I do have some input there. I don't typically participate in all the things having to do with process and votes and legal stuff. So I'm more like in it for the technical bits. But yeah, I'm still in that process too.
So, and what interesting happens right now? So what are you most excited about, or what happens in Jakarta EE space? So what they are doing?
Yeah, so in the Jakarta EE space, we're mostly preparing now for the Jakarta EE 10 release. That's a big topic that comes up. So we do have other things like plans for the next year involving a kind of a program to more educate developers about Jakarta EE. We've been talking a little bit about that. And it's essentially like all the sometimes boring bits to get the process running. So how do you release a release candidate to Maven Central? Do you need to have all the dependencies available? Do you stage things, or do you just release something to staging and not to Maven Central? So all those kinds of process things. So that's stuff we talk about. In general, like I said, at the Jakarta ecosystem, so to speak, the big thing is moving to Jakarta EE10.
So what is Jakarta EE10 about?
So Jakarta EE10 is mostly about finally adding new features to the platform. So we have spent quite a lot of time in the transition from Oracle to Eclipse, and then from the JavaX to the Jakarta namespace. So we had this thing like Jakarta EE8 that was the same as Java EE8. Then we had the minimal build. We had the build of Glassfish 5 that was built from the transferred source. We had Jakarta EE9 with the Jakarta namespace. We had Jakarta EE9.1, which supported JDK 11. Because we had no time for that still in Jakarta EE9. So all those transfery things were taken care of. And then Jakarta EE10 is finally the one that introduces new features to the platform. And
like which?
So we have quite a bit of them. So in the things I'm involved with is mostly faces, security, a bit of CDI. The big thing is the CDI-lite thing. So I'm focusing on build time features. So the entire CDI API, including a new set of extensions, is suitable to be processed at build time rather than runtime. So that's a big thing. It's actually quite funny, by the way. I think you remember that too. In the early EGB days, we had everything at build time.
Yes. So code generation, right? We generated lots of code which was compiled. Exactly.
Yeah. We had a lot of code. You had all those skeletons and stuff. And then you had these tools from all the vendors that you needed to invoke for an EGB beam to get into a state to be deployed. So everything was build time back then. And then the people hated it because it was such work and it was quite difficult to debug and what have you. And then a reflection came and people were like, oh, wow, this is so much easier and better and
slower. So everyone was excited as, okay, measure the performance because, the older library, the generated code was usually even faster because it was just that simple code, right? And the reflection was introduced with JDK 1.3 and it was proxy, the Java proxy, new proxy something, right? So, and with the proxy class, everything became slower. Yeah, so it became slower. It's not always that much slower. It's like sometimes just... But measurably slower. So it was... It didn't matter, but it was not faster, right? This was the interesting part. Yeah, so it has pros and cons. So it's sometimes a bit slower, but when you only do like one reflective operation in one HTTP request, you can't see the difference because it just like, for instance, getting a beam, calling a method using a reflection, then you don't notice this in the context of a HTTP request or a database call. It's completely irrelevant. But if you do hundreds of thousands of reflective calls within a single request, then you will get a difference. Yeah, it's, if you do several calls with request scoped, or you have a pulled EGB, you already notice the difference, right? Because the EGBs will just cache the proxies, and the request scoped, everything gets re-injected again. So you will see a little bit difference. But now everything moves back to 1999, right? So we get a lot of build time generation. It's like getting full circle. Only the difference is we're having better tools right now to do those things during runtime. So you can have just plugins to your Maven build, your Cradle build, what have you. So it's a lot less a pain than we had in 1999. We had to invoke all those things separately via command line tools and then with scripts. And it was just
Pain and those things were not standardized because like WebSphere had their own tool and WebLogic had their own tool. So it's more standardized. It's easier to integrate within your build process, but it's essentially going back to the beginning of Java EE. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, that's one thing. Another thing in Jakarta EE 10 is that it became sort of a theme that multiple specs adhere to, and that's removing a lot of the legacy stuff. So it's not so much a feature in that sense, but it's a feature in the sense of making the platform simpler to use and lowering the overhead for people new to the platform. Because all those deprecated things have been removed. So specifically, again, CDI participated in that team. So a lot of those old methods that were like deprecated since 1.2, they have been removed. So people do have some migration work to look at, depending on how they used CDI. Servlet did the same thing. So a lot of those old servlet things have been removed. I think it were methods that were deprecated in 2001 or so, like the log method, the single thread concept.
Single threaded model. I still remember that, right?
Yeah, that one. It was like so old. It was like removed a long time ago. Yeah. Or not removed, deprecated a long time ago. So that one finally has been removed. And JSF, now called Phases, did the same thing. So we had support to use JSP as a view template. So we removed that. We still had the old managed beans around in JSF. They have been long ago. We were advised to use CDI instead. So we removed those things. We still had our own expression language. So I don't think a lot of people knew that we still had it, but it was still there in the interfaces. They were all like long ago deprecated. So we removed those things as well. So this is kind of a theme where like a lot of the deprecated things were removed in multiple projects.
Okay.
And of course we have the feature things. So in JSF2, we have features to use Java as a view templating language. It was like a very old thing on the to-do list that we prototyped actually in, I think, 2012 or so, but it was still on the to-do list. So you can build your views via Java. So yeah, there's lots of things like that. Small things sometimes, like you can use more attributes on your cookie in Servlet. So this was...
But hey, writing the views in Java is actually huge, right?
Yeah, so it was...
It means I could use Java 17 via a somehow standardized interface, and you will call me and I will generate a view?
Yes, that's exactly what it means. It's like, in a way, this was supported in Phases quite a long time ago, like even from the beginning, where you could create or amend views programmatically, but it wasn't that exposed to the user. So you still had a lot of plumbing work to do to actually get this up and running. So we made that a standard feature.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. It was always the case because with the how it's called, if you build your own JSF component, you had to create the views by yourself, right? So you had to concatenate basically the string. So it was always available, but it was ugly to work with.
Yeah, so it was quite difficult to work with. And something like Wicked, for instance, which is quite similar to JSF, they had this concept of making the view programmatically a long time ago.
So it is not, this is like a builder pattern style and not like you give me control and I am just generating whatever I like with, let's say, text block in Java.
No, it's not necessarily that. It's like you get like an interface that you implement, and then you just add your components programmatically to
okay.
it.
So it's like Wicked. So because they are also, you are building, the view programmatically instead of with tags. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a bit like Wicked, or actually quite a lot like Wicked. I think the first requests we got for this feature was from the Wicked community. The people who were doing Wicked work, also doing JSF work, missing that particular feature. So they requested it back then. And you essentially have this swing or SWT style of programming where you have like a root and you add a command button to it, you add a input field, and you do all those things programmatically using the Java API. So yeah, that's stuff we did new.
Why you thought immediately about the string is because if there will be even lower level API, let's say I just give you a string back, then of course I could use GraalVM. In GraalVM I could load JavaScript or whatever script language I have and can use whatever template. I could use Mustache or whatever. So this could be also interesting. But this is more, a place for MVC, Jakarta MVC, right?
Yeah, so we can actually do that. So just get a string using the JDK 17, or it was 15, I think, actually. And then pass it on to the API, and you get a rendered result back. You can actually do that using the embedded version of Piranha Micro. So
nice.
An example for that. And it's just like a few lines of code where you input a string with tags, with JSF or HTML tags, and then you get a rendered result back. So this is essentially one of the other feature requests we had to use JSF as a general templating language to just render things for like emails or what have you. So it's not in the JSF spec itself, but you can do this using Piranha, and it's quite easy to do.
It's nice because the server-side rendering is coming back, so there will be revival of JSF soon, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully so. Hopefully so.
What other features? So we have lots of deprecation. Then we have programmatic construction or builder API in JSF, very similar to Wicked. What else spec? Can you briefly? So there was some discussion around concurrency, right?
In JSF?
No, in Jakarta EE.
In Jakarta EE. Yeah, so in Jakarta EE there was indeed. So I haven't been able to be involved with that. I wanted to quite badly because it's a topic quite close to my heart. But yeah, there's so many other things I was involved with that I haven't paid much attention to it. But the idea was that a lot of the things in EGB that haven't been migrated to have CDI compatible equivalents, they all have to do with concurrency some way or the other. But there's quite obvious the asynchronous annotation. That's about concurrency. Pooled beans are basically about concurrency, limiting the rate to your server. There's the other thing like the timer service. That's actually kind of concurrency artifact. So the idea was to move all those things to concurrency and then have them in CDI compatible versions. But that your dependency on EGB for all the useful features that it still has is quite reduced or maybe even null. So
there's another discussion because in microprofile they have already asynchronous, to somehow move it out of microprofile to Jakarta EE into the base or core profile, I think was the name, right? Core profile. Not always confuse core and base. Core profile.
Yeah, it's the core profile. So yeah, there was indeed a call for that. I think that Steve Millits asked for that. I support that. To have concurrency indeed as one of the elements in the core profile. So I think at the moment it hasn't made it in yet, but it would make sense to have that indeed, like concurrency together with CDI, together with, from my point of view, security, are some of those fundamental things that basically all other applications, other type of applications use. So yeah, I'm not really sure how far they got, so I have to take a look again, since they do have to implement something for Glassfish for that.
Of course.
So
in your free time. Any other specs you found interesting in Jakarta EE10, or we covered most of them? So lots of
So of course the security specs they're quite interesting. So we did have big plans for that, especially for the overall Jakarta security spec. So that hadn't happened too much, but we do have a very nice contribution from Payara for the OAuth, or actually OpenID Connect, is quite related to that. So that will be a new authentication mechanism in Jakarta security.
Oh, perfect. It's huge news, actually.
Also quite interesting, since I oversaw the creation of that feature when I was still at Payara, so I have a bit of a history with that. But that's interesting to see that being donated. And then the core specs on which Jakarta security depends, so authorization, authentication, they have a bit of improvements as well. So they're not that much exposed to the end users, since they're more like internal SPIs. But they have a lot of added small API methods to make the life of more like the server developers more easy to do. So one of the things we had to look at, and it's still not committed, by the way, but that's the policy class in Java SE. That's deprecated from Java SE 17 onwards. So we need to find a replacement for that. So we still have to work out the final details. There's not that much time left. We still have to do that. So we're approaching the deadline, and but yeah, a lot of stuff has been fleshed out for that. But as a side effect, that would mean that the replacement policy would be applicable to a per application level. So in Jakarta authorization, it had this very powerful concept of authorization modules, where you could essentially influence all the authorization rules for there. But it was a bit of a hidden feature in Java EE. So you could only install it at the application server level, not per application. You couldn't deploy it via your var. So you had to do this at the Java SE/server level. And that thing will be usable at the application level.
That's interesting.
Making it much more available and putting it much more into the hands of actual developers.
Yeah, it has to be, because in modern application servers, we learned an hour ago, are about runtimes, right? So there's everything is application specific.
So that more aligns with that. So that would be interesting.
What we covered with deprecation, overall deprecation, then JSF improvements with Java builders, security improvements, Java core profile, maybe Jakarta 11, and what else? New specs?
So what else do we have? Let me think. We have the security specs at all those small new methods. We have the servlet spec, small new methods too. And JSF, a couple of big features. The concurrency is still to be seen. I don't know this from the top of my head. We had a couple of enhancements in the
configuration, I think, right? You get the configuration for microprofile, I think. Or is this...
configuration, that's on the agenda. That's not Jakarta EE10, so that's coming in a little later version. So that would be still quite interesting to see happening.
Okay.
Well.
Last question. What is what are the most exciting Piranha cloud features which are not standard? So we talked about lots of certification, but what you are most excited about, I implemented this in Piranha, is another standard. Like, you told me I can just very easily pass a string and get resolved templates or something like this. Is this anything, interesting in Piranha? Some innovation?
So something which I personally really like. That's in the dynamic version of Piranha Micro. That's the ability to run via a isolated class loader. So you can implement You can load your application within an embedded version of it, and then it will not see or touch your environment. So for an embedded server, it's always the problem that it runs on a flat class path, which is sometimes you want it because you want to use all the things on your class path, and sometimes you do not want that because it interferes with your environment. So Piranha Micro has this isolated class loader concept where it's running totally separated from the other parts of your application. You can use this like in a server environment to run different versions of Jakarta EE at the same time, for instance. Every instance of Piranha Micro will load the Jakarta runtimes in different versions. So this is something I quite like as a feature.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit of a hassle to get the class loader to work, to get everything to work. But that's quite interesting.
And useful. What I remember is always problems, with interfering between libraries of application server with application libraries. So if you can do this, if it works. So what it means in practice, I could use a buggy Log4j version, and you can in Piranha introduce a patch, a newer version of Log4j, and Piranha will use the newer one, not from my application, from my main method, right?
Yeah, something like that.
No, exactly that, right?
Yeah, it depends. So if it's more like you have your isolated class loader, you load stuff into that.
Yes.
And then it will not use the stuff that's on your class path already.
Yeah.
So if the class path would have a log4j there, it will not pick it up.
This is what I meant, right? I have a main class, let's say, with my log4j, which is buggy, and it just writes hello world. And then I'm starting from my main method, your Piranha, and you set up your, bug-free log4j. Then the newest one, then Piranha will just use the newest one and won't see my log4j, right?
Yeah, so then it will mean exactly that. Yeah, so I thought you meant it the other way around.
No, the other way around would be terrible.
Yeah, that would indeed be terrible, since if you would interfere with your isolated environment.
Yeah, this would be like the hierarchical class loaders, which we had, in years back then. No, I would say the true isolation is useful, because then we can go sure that whatever the application did before, we don't care. We have our own little world, Piranha world, right?
Exactly. So that's quite usable, and somewhat related to that. So the way to load things into the isolated class loader, we use the Maven API for that. So it's not loading jars from the file system, but it's using the Maven API. So it could come from the file system if you have your dependencies in a local repo, but it can also load them over the network or from whatever location Maven would patch them. So that's, I think, a quite interesting non-standard feature as well.
Yeah, interesting maybe, but also very useful security-wise. Because then you could say I'm loading, all the dependencies from my Nexus or Artifactory, and they are security scanned, and I'm only allowing certain versions. So you can be sure, whatever you are loading is already scanned, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of the idea, or one of the ideas to have this feature. So the Piranha Micro runtime, when you downloaded it, it does not contain any library. It's just a pure loader. It contains, the only library it contains are the Maven libraries. And then it uses Maven to bootstrap all the other things, servlet, JSF, what have you. And they can come indeed from an Artifactory that's security scanned. Yeah. And pretty much the entire idea behind the feature.
Yeah. Almost like Headless Applets, which are loaded from Maven, right?
It's a bit, that's a good it's a bit like that indeed, yeah. So,
Perfect.
We could even use this as a tagline, Headless Applets loaded from Maven.
Yeah, exactly. So,
cool.
Yeah, thank you. It was actually a great time. So I will correct, my statement at the next AirHacks TV. So I will show the both charts. So I was wrong.
All right, thank you.
And I'm really glad that we have Piranha Cloud. And take a look, please, at the serverless container from AWS with the jersey. I think in a few hours you have it running because everything is already integrated. The event is parsed, the return value is parsed, Jersey is invoked. So you will only have, to replace the Jersey endpoint with Piranha, and then it should work. And this would be actually great news. So another I could yeah. So where people can find you? So Piranha Cloud and your Twitter and whatever you have. Or if someone would like to have, a new version of Maven, they should also hire you. So where people can hire you, what is the...
So the main website at the moment is just piranha.cloud. That's where you find all the cloud bits. And I'm Arjan_Times at Twitter. And so like I said, we're looking into some kind of support company around Piranha Cloud. So that's going to be announced hopefully soon. So it could be a couple of weeks. We're not really sure. We're still like in the investigate phase, but that would be interesting. And then people could contact us or me via that company. But
Perfect.
That's still a few weeks away.
No problem. So you have lots of free time, to contribute to Glassfish again. So
that might be. We'll see about that.
Okay. Thank you a lot. Bye.
All right. Thank you too. Bye. Cheers.